The anime starts with the typical super powerful protagonist fighting against some ferocious creatures. He is Yuji, and he uses a wolf and a fire-breathing slime to wipe out all the monsters like it was a piece of cake. An adventurer named Gale spread the rumor in the guild of the city of Pashtan, but nobody believed him that such a strong slime existed. Just then, Yuji arrived at that place with the slime on his shoulder. Yuji returned from a mission in less time than expected, and not only that, but he got a bunch of flowers that had been ordered because they were difficult to obtain. Aegis, the manager of the guild branch, was not so impressed. He only confirmed that Yuji was no ordinary person, but he could not demand too many explanations from him either. Then, someone arrived reporting desperately that a horde of 10,000 monsters was approaching the city, and they did not know the reason. Aegis gathered the adventurers, but instead of ordering them to protect the people, he asked them to flee as soon as possible. Although everyone wanted to save the city, they were at such a huge disadvantage that it would be best to help evacuate as many people as they could. Then, Yuji said that he had an idea. Although they underestimated him for being just a tamer, he took out a dragon bone, explaining that he could use it to recreate dragon fire, thus eliminating all the monsters. Despite his good reputation, they had never heard of it being possible. Gale was the only one who trusted Yuji and assured everyone that he would really do it. Besides, they had no other choice. Everyone got ready, and Lily handed out medicine created from the flower that Yuji had brought. They did not expect them to be useful so soon in the battle they were about to face. Yuji communicated with the Pride Wolf, who was running through the forest with the slimes, and watched from a high point to the beginning of the war, waiting for the right moment to intervene. Ahead of him, several panels opened with the numerous spells and skills he could use, deciding which one was best to protect the city and defend himself at the same time. Then, Dryad warned him that there was someone suspicious who was leaving magic stones on the road. Maybe he was the cause of the attack, so the slimes attacked him. Yuji used a spell to trap him and to neutralize the stone while Lily spied on him, discovering that he could use magic different from that of an ordinary tamer. The suspicious man took a poison so that they could not take him prisoner. Pride Wolf passed by when the monsters approached the city, so the slimes went to help the adventurers in the fight by launching a bombardment of fire. This time, they could not deny that the story was true and continued fighting. Meanwhile, Yuji observed that there were too many areas with monsters, but if he launched a very powerful attack, the city would be affected. So, he came up with the idea of using the magic stone he had found, ordering everyone to take shelter inside the city, where he would place a barrier. The problem was that they couldn't get one of the monsters that had already entered out, until Pride Wolf took it upon himself to defeat it, allowing everyone to get to safety. As soon as Yuji had the chance, he placed a barrier over the entire city, and everything around was incinerated with hellish flames. The adventurers couldn't believe that a simple tamer could perform spells like that. The truth is that when they saw a group of monsters approaching that survived, Yuji was already quite weak because he used his life force to compensate for the magic power that was running out. Even so, he didn't hesitate to use the powerful barrier again and attack again with hellish fire. Because of that, he fainted the next second. When he woke up, Lily was taking care of him, while Aegis investigated the corpse in the ash forest and found the destroyed magic stone. At night, Yuji saw that they had a celebration because they were able to save the city, and they were especially grateful to him for putting his life at risk, wondering at the same time why he was willing to sacrifice himself in that way. But since he was not obliged to answer, he preferred to continue keeping his secret. In his previous life, Yuji was an ordinary office worker. Now he tried to keep a low profile. That's why he escaped from the city when he felt better, because he had already attracted too much attention. After that, he came to Kilia City looking for food because they left without anything in their stomachs. The problem was that he stood out a lot accompanied by a wolf and several very active slimes. When they found a meat stand, they asked for all the available pieces. Yuji tried to join the city's guild. Since he was just a tamer, it seemed difficult for them to accept him. Until the secretary thought that he could work on reconnaissance missions, but he had to join a team specialized in the area. When he was checking the mission board, he met Rhodas, Tina, and Lisa, who invited him to join their team. Although Rhodas did not trust that he would be of help to them because he was only a tamer, at least the girls were kinder when explaining to them that they had an investigation mission, where it was better to avoid monsters than to use brute force. So, they decided to leave Rhodas aside on that occasion. since according to rumors, all of their previous companions had escaped or disappeared. But that was just an excuse to bother him, setting the condition that he leave Yuji alone or he could not accompany them. The mission consisted of identifying the location of the Earth Dragon. Since it was a powerful monster, they did not have to face it. Rather, they had to be careful when looking for it, to avoid an unnecessary and risky fight. Each member of the team had a task, and Yuji's was only to scout the area. Still, he sent his beasts ahead to monitor the danger on the road, warning the team in time when monsters were approaching 2 kilometers away. It was impressive that Yuji could detect it from so far away, so instead of dodging them, Rodus wanted to check it out. Luckily, he was strong enough to take care of all of them on his own, and they were able to continue on their way without problems. At night, they set up camp away from the main road to decrease the risk of being attacked by bandits, because they were a small group. When they asked Yuji how he had learned the scouting skill, he simply said that he had suddenly obtained it. They couldn't believe that he had such a good teacher, and Yuji didn't know how to explain that he simply obtained his power out of nowhere. Rodus was the one who cut the subject short by sending them to rest and establishing the order of the guards. It is then that we see a flashback of the moment when Yuji arrived in that world, confused because he thought he had fallen asleep in front of the computer and did not understand why there was a screen with video game indicators in front of him. There it said that he had the ability of Tamer, and by just touching a slime, he mastered the ability turning it into his companion. The slime led him into the forest until he reached an abandoned cabin. Inside, there were many books. The first one he opened was a grimoire of divine destruction. Just by reading it, he acquired magical abilities of fire, water, earth, and wind. A lot of slimes surrounded him anxiously, waiting for him to tame them too. Then, each one began to read a different book, and that resulted in Yuji himself mastering each of the abilities that were written in them at the same time that his magical power and life force increased, and he ended up acquiring the title of Sage. He could even communicate with slimes. Since that moment, only a week had passed. His companions woke him up in the middle of the night, telling him that Rodus had left while he was on guard duty at the camp. Pride Wolf was running after him through the forest, but he didn't seem to have escaped. Tina and Lisa were also sneaking after him. From the beginning, they found it suspicious that he organized the guard with the well-being of others in mind. They didn't ask Yuji for help because he wasn't supposed to be good at fighting. They chose to put themselves at risk if they were discovered. Luckily, one of the slimes distracted Rodus by making noise, and he was almost sliced by his sword. Confirming that there was nothing wrong, Rodus continued on his way to a cabin. It was the hideout of some bandits who sold people. They planned to pretend that the girls escaped from the mission, and that Yuji was eliminated by some monsters. That meant that the rumors were true. Rodus's former companions disappeared because they were captured, just as they were about to catch Tina and Lisa. The boss noticed that the moon was blue, so he ordered them to act quickly, as it was an omen of disaster. When they left the den with the intention of attacking the girls, a strange-looking monster had appeared, and they were afraid that it was because of the blue moon. So the boss ordered them to retreat, not imagining that it was just the group of slimes riding the wolf. Yuji looked through the hundreds of spells again, not sure which one to choose, because they seemed to be very dangerous, until he finally found one useful for that occasion. The slimes surrounded the den, and Yuji cast a medium freezing spell. Still, the hut turned into a block of ice, proving that it was a more powerful spell than he imagined. When the slimes took out the bandits, the girls recognized the boss as Gelios, a dangerous wanted criminal. They were relieved, saying that they should have trusted their partner more from the beginning. But that reminded Yuji that that was why he was given a lot of work and overtime in his previous life. Although he didn't want to help out more than necessary in this new life, he still told the girls that they could continue the mission thanks to the slimes preventing them from running into monsters along the way. When they got distracted, he released a slime into the sky to find a good place to camp. They were all able to light the fire and set up the tents without any help. They made food and set up guard rounds without the girls having to do anything else but rest. Yuji kept wondering what the blue moon really meant, and he would find an answer later. The next day, they continued their search for the Earth Dragon. For some reason, they couldn't find even the slightest trace, despite having the help of hundreds of slimes traveling around a wide territory. Even so, the girls were confident that the slimes would succeed at any moment, just as they believed they could do anything after having seen how they defeated the bandits. Yuji thought that they were just overestimating his abilities, remembering that it wasn't the first time something like that happened. When he took an exam to be accepted into the guild, he broke a crystal ball due to his excessive energy. Then he had to give a magic demonstration, using a small fireball so as not to attract attention. But they were still impressed because not only did he not use a wand, but he didn't have to recite a spell either. Then, Yuji shouted "Fireball!" and launched it, shattering a giant rock, leaving them open-mouthed. He understood that he needed to use weaker spells. Looking through his endless list, he found something to limit his own power. By using a transfer spell to cast the powers through the slimes, his abilities did not stand out as much as when he used them directly. Back to the present, they still had not found the Earth Dragon, when the sky suddenly turned dark as the blue moon rose high above. At the guild headquarters, Father Style told Chief Rayard that the blue moon predicted disaster. A light fell from the sky and fell on the ground, causing an explosion. A book of legends showed the appearance of the dragon. Yuji was quick to order the slimes to retreat and regroup with Pride Wolf. He was sure that it was not the Earth Dragon, but a much stronger one. Pride Wolf ran into some monsters, but they were no problem when Yuji used the transfer spells through the slimes. Thus, they easily crossed the dangerous area and later were almost swept away by a current of wind that came from inside a rock. Thanks to clearing the entire area by defeating the monsters along the way, Yuji and his team didn't have to fight when they passed by. Only they hadn't noticed that they had just crossed a canyon, known for being dangerous, and that was where the Earth Dragon ended up appearing, which was hidden under the ground. The girls hid because their mission was only to find the location, not to attack it. Still, Yuji wanted to face it, starting by trying some weak spells. The rocks and the slime flames didn't even tickle the dragon, so Yuji decided to increase the level, being careful not to use something that would draw too much attention. The dragon launched a charge spinning like a roller. That's why the new avalanche of rocks didn't do anything to it when it headed straight for Yuji. Just then, the wind current came out again, raising a cloud of dust. The dragon couldn't see anything, so it couldn't escape when Yuji launched the hellfire. The girls couldn't believe that only his bones remained while the ground around him was burning due to the intense heat. Luckily, they believed that he only used a trick to make the flammable gases that were coming out from various places in that area explode. When they returned to the guild, they proudly told that they not only completed the reconnaissance mission, but also defeated the Earth Dragon, and to prove it, they brought the sample skull. In the end, they received a lot of money, adding up the missions and the reward for having defeated the criminal who led the bandits. At the same time, Rayard invited Yuji to the meeting where they were planning a strategy to defeat the blue dragon that appeared in the forest. When they asked Yuji to tell what the dragon looked like, he looked for a graphic thought spell, thanks to which he was able to create a fairly detailed drawing of the creature, identical to the one in the book they had reviewed earlier. Father Style explained that the book was incomplete because several pages had been torn out, but it said that the dragon grew in the darkness and that it wiped out an entire continent in 3 days. The only one who could defeat it was a divine emissary with god-level powers. Someone like that was impossible to find in those times. However, 30 years ago during the summer solstice, an eclipse covered the sun, and a ritual was carried out in the cathedral of the capital. The effects of the ritual were supposed to be seen exactly 30 years later. To be more exact, a week had already passed since the promised date was fulfilled. It was a spirit summoning ceremony that would bring the person who would save them from calamity. Although they had no sign that the summoning ritual had worked, perhaps it was the cause of the dragon's appearance. The sky turned dark again as the dragon grew larger. As they began to fall into despair, Rayard asked them to remain calm. After all, they could not stand by and do nothing, organizing an attack with everything they had at their disposal. The father had noticed that Yuji was not an ordinary person, so he gave him a valuable item that he brought for that confrontation. It was a very valuable dagger, but no one had managed to use it. However, he was sure that Yuji would find some use for it. The system recognized it as the Cathis dagger, which focused the wielder's abilities on the blade. Styles said that it was a divine decision to give him that dagger, and then invited his assistant Johann to pray to the gods for more advice. The attack plan would take place in the morning, while the dragon continued to grow in the night. Yuji knew that many lives would be lost in the battle, but during the guild exam, he was told that his power was unusually stronger than the others. So he made the decision to face the dragon on his own before the others put themselves at risk. He used Pride Wolf to quickly enter the forest. According to the system, the dragon had resistance to earth. water, wind, and darkness, being weak to fire and holy-type skills. The hellfire that Yuji had easily won the last few battles with was completely useless against the monstrous creature. The failed attack only caused it to respond in anger by throwing lightning everywhere. Afterwards, they noticed how it absorbed the vital energy of the forest to recharge itself with magic, growing larger and larger. The next plan was to use Kethis' dagger to concentrate the hellfire into a direct and powerful blow. They first advanced to get closer, protecting themselves from the lightning with a shield. When Yuji was right under the dragon, he used a skill to jump up step by step on some shields in the air until he was face to face with the enemy. Then he distracted him by throwing a fireball at his face. Then he launched himself and stabbed the dagger in his eye. At that moment, he used hellfire again with all his power concentrated on the dagger that exploded directly in the dragon's face. Even so, the battle was just beginning. The tail hit Yuji, throwing him through the hills, while the dragon rose with a hole where all trace of its eye had been destroyed. Yuji managed to protect himself, but the magic power was in the red, and he didn't have much life force either. He had to protect himself again from the rays that were destroying the layers of the shield one by one, while he designed a new plan to hit the enemy directly. Then, the notice appeared that the divine strike would be available in seconds. He didn't even need to know what it was, Yuji simply used it, finally knocking down his opponent. When the dragon fell to the ground weakened, he took the opportunity to attack it again, stabbing it in the neck with the dagger. Then he used hellfire while cutting it length by length, blowing its entire head off. The next day, Rayard told Yuji that someone had taken care of eliminating the dragon at night. They knew this because the father received a divine message confirming it. In addition to that, Rayard explained to him that he should trust his guildmates, and if he wanted to fight a dragon, he just needed to ask for help. Yuji pretended that he didn't know what he was talking about, so Rayard left him alone, understanding that he didn't want to stand out. After that, Yuji planned to move out of town again. His teammates recommended that he go to Ricardo. He just hoped that there weren't any strange things there like the sky getting dark or mythological dragons appearing out of nowhere. They waved him off without noticing that some slimes stayed behind to watch over them. When he was walking through the forest, they told him that there was an emergency. Dryad led him through the forest, showing him that the area where he defeated the dragon was full of mushrooms. It turns out that the emergency was that she simply wanted help collecting them. With them, she could make sage potions and mana restorers. The idea was too useful considering that Yuji always ran out of magic power, so she used the slimes to collect all the mushrooms in seconds. It didn't take Dryad long to create the first potion either, discovering that it had turned red instead of blue because it contained too much magic power, so she needed crystal water to dilute it. So, Yuji created a water distiller using the shields to remove all the dirt and then purify it with a slime effect. Days ago, Yuji found Dryad convalescing inside a dry log. He transferred magic to her through a slime to revitalize her. Dryad ended up that way when someone left a magic stone that drained all her power. Since she was linked to the forest, everything that happened to her affected her directly. Yuji took charge of neutralizing the stone that had caused the problem, and that was when the monsters came out. But he was able to eliminate them immediately, and as thanks for all the help, Dryad gave him all the flowers she had brought to the guild. The potion that Dryad created with the mushrooms had a color similar to the magic stone that had harmed the forest before. She did not know the reason. What she knew was that the magic stones were impregnated with the dragon's magic, since they were objects that were found in the place where they had fallen in battle. That's how the mushrooms had grown in that place, full of magical power. That power was neither good nor bad by nature. It all depended on the purposes for which it was used. Like the case of Dryad, who only made beneficial potions and gave Yuji his share before leaving. So he was able to continue his way to the next city, until Pride Wolf got distracted when he detected the smell of humans in the middle of a thick fog. They ended up arriving at a town that seemed to be dark. When they saw the villagers, they were all smiling as if welcoming them, but that only made the situation stranger and stranger. One of them invited them to spend the night so they wouldn't travel in the fog because it was dangerous. When Yuji rejected him, he asked him to at least accept a meal. The only thing they could offer him was a piece of bread and wine. They only wanted to know why he had come to the town. Yuji explained that he was actually going to Ricardo, but he got sidetracked by the fog. It was strange that they kept watching him with the excuse that they weren't used to receiving visitors. Before they left, the man commented that the name of the town was Messias. There was definitely something too strange about that place. The man reported through a crystal ball that an adventurer passed by there, but they shouldn't worry because he was a simple tamer, so they could continue with their plans without any problem. When Yuji finished crossing the forest approaching his destination, he thought again that something strange was happening since winter had suddenly arrived, covering everything with snow. It was so cold that Wolf was already starting to complain. Luckily, Yuji found an insulation barrier between the spells to keep warm. They finally arrived at the entrance of the city, where the guard said that they were suddenly covered by a blizzard 10 days ago. Yuji said that the reason for his visit was to try the good food there, so they would let him in without further explanation. He soon arrived at a restaurant that was recommended to him, but they had already closed because they used up all the firewood they had to keep warm, and now they had no way to cook. Actually, Yuji did want to try the good food, so he offered his help. Even though they explained to him that freshly cut firewood was useless because it needed to dry for a year, he still headed straight to the forest. He didn't even know what kind of tree was best for firewood. He simply took out an axe from among the equipment he had stored and used it with the combat skill. Because of that, he ended up cutting down all the trees in the area. After cutting and stacking the logs, he searched for a spell to dry them. He found a moisture absorption spell that he used through slime. When he brought the firewood to the restaurant, the waitress called the chef right away, but the old man said that it was so dry that the flames would burn the food. So, Yuji used a spell to rehydrate it, impressing the chef because he had never seen such good firewood in his life. The fire he created was perfect, and with the best flame, he could create the best food. Yuji took out all the firewood he had created and used the slimes to hydrate it as needed, promising that they would look for more if they needed it. But his stomach growled with hunger, so the chef had to start cooking right away and served him some delicious grilled meat. At last, Yuji was able to try a dish that tasted good since he came to this world, and the chef promised that he would make him a stew later, which was the best thing on the menu, but it took time to prepare. The waitress felt sorry because everyone in the village actually needed firewood to keep warm, so Yuji promised to come back the next day with a lot more wood. At the guild, all the requests were for firewood. After applying for the job, he had to go to Wadke to find out what characteristics the logs had to be cut with. Although he didn't think a tamer would be useful, any help was good at that time when they couldn't make enough firewood for everyone, explaining that not even the help from nearby villages was enough. Then, Yuji took the opportunity to ask if he knew anything about the Messias village. It turns out that that place had been abandoned for a long time, so what Yuji saw there was even stranger. But the most important thing now was getting firewood, and Yuji was quick to impress everyone when he cut hundreds of trees with a single cut of his axe. Then he cut the logs with incredible agility, stacking them in seconds. Wodka had a lot of questions to ask him, but he was content to accept the excellent work he did. And that was even though he hadn't seen how the slimes took care of leaving everything completely dry. The guild hall was filled with the hundreds of logs that were carried by the slimes. Actually, that was something very unusual. There was hardly a legend of a powerful master who used slimes to carry things. Yuji thought about asking Father Style about that. Despite the piles and piles of firewood they had already collected, in the end it was only enough for the entire town to use for about 3 days straight. Yuji continued to work to carry more and more by building a mountain of wood, and of course the reward for that was a lot of money. After that, they could rest easy, and the next day they were eagerly waiting to try the feast that the chef prepared, a stew of herbs that was the specialty of the town. The old man also served some nice pieces of meat and herbs for the beasts that accompanied Yuji. He once again had a miraculous experience with the taste so divine that it was worthy only of the gods themselves. Still, the chef claimed that this wasn't even the best he could offer, as the herb field was attacked by wild beasts that ate the best tasting ones. Obviously, Yuji prepared his team by dividing them into 2 groups to protect the plantations from any creature that tried to steal the valuable herbs. Another group went into the forest looking for the gluttonous boar that had been roaming the area. The boar turned out to be huge and fearsome, making the slimes tremble in fear. Luckily, they had Yuji's magic with which they roasted it. Likewise, they continued advancing while burning all the beasts they encountered along the way until they came across a strange blue ball that they didn't know what it was. Dryad hadn't seen anything like it either, but she felt that it emanated some traces of magic. When Yuji touched it, it began to turn black as it absorbed its magic. Yuji thought that it could also be one of the effects of the dragon, an object that could turn into an evil magic stone. Dryad thought that the magic in the area could actually be low because the stone was absorbing it. That could also be the cause of the sudden snowfall, because magic caused heat, and if there was very little, only cold could remain. The worst thing is that a stone like that did not appear naturally, but had to have been created by a human. Yuji used a spell to purify it from darkness. After neutralizing it, he ordered his slimes to search the area to see if they found another similar one. There were a total of 108 stones located in an area that created a perfect circle. So they headed to the center to see if they discovered something important. Although everything seemed normal, Yuji felt something strange, so he ordered all his companions to retreat while he stayed to destroy the forest, sure that there was something hidden somewhere. After blowing up everything in a range of several meters, they discovered that there really was an entrance under the ground. For the first time, Yuji was excited, explaining that he had to save the city, simply because they had very good food. Inside the place, they found huge machines with advanced technology. Yuji had not seen anything like it in that world. They also found some machines with magic stones that seemed to be in the process of being manufactured. Some men in capes came running when they noticed that the explosion damaged the machines before the stones were ready, and they had to report it to the boss. At the moment, Yuji was able to know that the boss was called Javier. Then he continued exploring very carefully, but the slimes were too loud to advance silently. Yuji put a stealth spell on them to prevent them from being discovered and let them explore on their own while he returned to the surface while continuing to monitor what was happening. The cloaked men entered a room, but no door was an impediment for the slippery slimes who passed through it without problems. Ahead was a door with 2 levers that they had to lower at the same time to open the entrance. The same path they took underground until they reached some stairs. Yuji followed it from the top until he came across Messiah Village, and the exit from the underground was in the village. The cloaked men belonged to the Blue Moon of Salvation organization, and their teacher Javier turned out to be the same one who attended to them when they were in that place. His men informed him that an explosion damaged the machines when the stones were not even finished. He had to gather all his men, ordering them to collect the evil minerals that they left scattered around the forest. They did not even care about moving in a group anymore. The order was to complete the mission and eliminate all witnesses they found along the way. They did not imagine that Yuji had not only destroyed all the minerals, but that the slimes had surrounded the town before they left, and then checked that there were no innocent people in danger inside the town. When they found a library, they collected all the books and documents there. When the first men tried to leave the town, the slimes captured them in a net, and they did the same as the first one they had met. They took poison so as not to be caught as hostages or give any information. In the library, there was another sealed door. To open it, they had to put out all the candles at the same time. Inside was a huge treasure of gold and jewels and the skeleton of someone who was surely trapped. When a member of the organization approached, he could only see how all the texts and treasures they kept had been stolen. The group of explorers had also been completely eliminated. Luckily, Yuji was listening to the whole conversation when Javier mentioned that if the main members were eliminated, a powerful weapon would be activated that would cause the destruction of almost the entire world. So, unleashing hellfire to eradicate them was not an option. Instead, they did plan a powerful counterattack. Far from what anyone might believe, when they took out their swords, they did not intend to fight with them, but rather, they pointed their own necks so that the machine would explode, eliminating the entire world. The earth began to shake when the slimes escaped, and Yuji covered them with a reinforced shield, looking for an explosion spell to propel them away from there as quickly as possible. Then he activated several barriers on top of each other, with anti-physical, anti-magic, and magic transfer characteristics, to contain the explosion of the lethal weapon. The earth split and flames came out that devastated the entire town. The flames were barely contained by the barrier, and Yuji could not find any more barrier spells. So he had to create one himself by combining several spells until he formed a total isolation matrix. When the flames began to come out, Yuji contained them in a gigantic black cube that was consuming all his magic power at an alarming speed. The other barriers were already broken, and the flames did not stop fluttering until they finished causing a large explosion, but nothing that caused damage around. Wolf had hidden underground scared because this time they were really in danger. Luckily, only a crater remained where the village had been seconds before, and when they returned to the city, everyone was talking about the huge explosions they felt in the forest. For some reason, they always explained these strange phenomena, believing that they were meteorites. The best of all was that the snow had begun to melt. That's why the next day they had a celebration for the end of winter, and Yuji was the special guest for having helped them fill the firewood reserves. He was also in charge of protecting the crops, which meant that now he would taste the real first-class stew. With just one bite, Yuji fainted from pleasure. When he woke up, he took out the texts he got in the village. But when he opened the scrolls, the letters disappeared instantly. The only one that remained intact was a list with the names of the people the organization was looking for. To top it off, some mercenaries received the same list, and among them was Yuji's name. The mercenaries were quick to find him, locating him in the forest when he left Ricardo City. They recommended him to go to Beginia, which was famous for selling monster armor, ideal for a tamer like him. The best craftsman was Master Geigel, and he could be found in his workshop. The slimes were excited to discover more delicious food. They didn't know that the trip would be affected because the mercenaries were spying on them, with the mission of observing Yuji to determine if he was dangerous to the Blue Moon organization. In reality, Yuji knew he was being ambushed, but he couldn't eliminate them, because it would raise more suspicions, causing them to consider him a real enemy and not just a suspect. The mercenaries continued to watch him when he arrived at the most famous armor workshop of all, mocking him when they noticed that he didn't have the money to buy what he wanted, and so they kicked him out. They later saw that he was a weakling, unable to face a person who stumbled along the way. Yuji continued to pretend that he had no money to even buy food. So, he used the slimes to search for lost coins on the ground, then got drunk in a tavern until he passed out. Still, the mercenaries weren't convinced, making the decision to observe him in action during a mission where he had to face some monsters. Since they were watching him, Yuji couldn't use defense spells, so they wouldn't notice his true abilities. Pride Wolf wasn't used to fighting because Yuji always did all the work, but at that moment he had to act as a tamer, and it was normal for his beasts to fight in his place. Although Wolf was very scared, he took down the first monster with a single blow. He didn't even remember that he was that strong. When he first met Yuji, he was just a wild wolf that tried to attack him, and he quickly learned who was in charge. Yuji used telepathy to understand him when he begged for his life, apologizing for attacking. So, he happily agreed to be tamed as a domesticated dog. Pride Wolf made the mistake of defeating the monsters too quickly, so the mercenaries again suspected that Yuji actually had talent as a tamer. To keep up the facade, he cast a healing spell to prolong the fight. He also increased the strength of the monsters so that Wolf would run away in fear, but now they seemed too strong to face them. Still, Wolf didn't allow them to help him, but instead defeated them himself using all his strength. At least the mercenaries bought the story that he was weak anyway, because it took him a long time to win the fight. However, a monster suddenly rose up and Yuji defended himself very well by slicing it with a single sword strike. Obviously, it was too amazing to be considered a weakling. When Yuji was about to order the slimes to attack, he heard the mercenaries say resignedly that there was no point in continuing to watch over a mere tamer. When they left, the slimes spying on them could still hear that their next target would be a priest. They reported what happened to their boss through a crystal ball and confirmed that the target was Father Style, so Yuji couldn't allow them to continue acting on their own. So he used a freezing spell right away to neutralize them, keeping the father safe for the moment. Now Yuji was able to return to the workshop, admitting that he did bring money to buy armor. Only the assistant chased him away, believing that the master would not create anything for small slimes. However, Geigel scolded him because he was the one who had to make those decisions. When he analyzed the slimes, he scolded the assistant again for trying to chase away the most powerful clients who had ever stepped foot in his workshop. Unfortunately, he still didn't have armor available for high-level monsters. He would have to make it from scratch, but the other drawback was that he lacked the special materials he needed. It wasn't obvious at first glance, but along with their tamer, a simple slime and Pride Wolf possessed a power he had never seen before. Geigel explained that they required a lesser fire dragon jewel. Even with that, the armor would be too weak for them, so he needed to get the jewel of a blue dragon. Although that race lived in the mountains, the blues were hard to find and experienced hunters weren't able to defeat them. Regardless, the better the material, the better the armor he could make. Yuji took advantage of accepting all the guild's requests related to dragons to make money while he researched. The secretary informed him that lesser fire dragons were not defeated by magic due to the protection of their jewels and scales. The usual way to defeat them was by using water, but they couldn't carry that much water to the mountain. Even if he used water magic, he needed a lot of magic power, and in the river lived a dangerous piranha that ate humans. For Yuji, the solution was very simple. He just had to accept the mission of eliminating the piranha as well. When they reached the mountain, they came across a red slime that they added to their army to look for the piranha by creating a fishing net with the slimes. It was very dark down there, and they found a hole. A slime went down to investigate but stopped responding. Then another one went down to investigate what was happening. Soon they both went up scared, being chased by the piranha that ended up getting caught in the net. Yuji took them out by releasing them in the air and left the monster frozen, but broke the ice in seconds by attacking them furiously. So this time, he roasted it like a barbecue on the fire, making sure to defeat it completely. Soon they found the lesser fire dragons. The problem was that the slimes were shaking in fear because they were taught from birth that they were very dangerous. So, Yuji attacked one on his own, launching a water cannon that knocked it down very easily because if they didn't keep warm, they would lose their lives. Thus he obtained the first jewel without difficulty, and thanks to that, the slimes understood that dragons were not so scary, jumping with enthusiasm, sure that they would beat them up. The best of all was that after knocking down several dragons, they were actually able to get one of the unusual blue dragons. That one was much bigger and looked stronger than the previous ones. The slimes surrounded it, bombarding it with water cannons. Unfortunately, they were unable to cause any damage. Then, Yuji used a freezing spell to cool it down faster. The effect was still very soft, so he cast the freezing spell multiplied by 10. The dragon melted the tons of ice again. Still, he couldn't stand it for long, eventually falling defeated. Not only did they get a gigantic jewel, but they also took the dragon's corpse. That way they could prove to the guild that they had completed all 202 requests for lesser fire dragons, plus the human-eating piranha from the river. Afterwards, Yuji was quick to go to the workshop, where he gave Geigel the blue dragon jewel to ask for armor for Pride Wolf. Then he took out another blue jewel to make armor for the slimes. Aside from that, he told him that if he needed normal jewels for more armor, he had plenty of them. Geigel couldn't believe that he got so many, assuring that he would do the best job of his life with those materials. As soon as they were ready, Pride Wolf tried his own, feeling that he could run very lightly. The slimes were also very fast, and with a magic boost they went so fast that they were lost from sight. Geigel was not satisfied with this demonstration, so Yuji tried a freezing spell that left him speechless. So he had to promise not to tell anyone about his abilities. The armor almost broke because of that spell. Obviously, he could make something stronger. The secret was in getting better materials. For example, the fire dragon that lived submerged in the lava of the volcano and occasionally poked its head out, but that no one had ever been able to defeat. Before thinking of a plan against that dragon, the slimes warned that the mountain dragons suddenly went crazy, just like the monsters that once attacked the city of Fasten. Wolf ran to the volcano to see if they could find someone suspicious of the Blue Moon organization. There were actually 2 people there. Apart from that, the volcano erupted, and the terrifying dragon suddenly came out of there enraged. The 2 people they found were searching for the fire dragon. According to their conversation, someone from Ordarion gave them something that would definitely be able to defeat it. Yuji wanted to know what they were hiding in the barrels they were carrying, but the slime couldn't catch them with its net. It turns out that they weren't just amateurs. At least, they thought the net was just a monster hunter's trap. However, when they tried to catch them again, they reacted in time by stabbing the slime with a sword, even though it was invisible. Still, Yuji caught them because they were completely surrounded. However, just like all the followers of the Blue Moon, they simply took poison and killed themselves before being questioned. The contents of the barrels felt the same as the evil stones that damaged the forest, so they called Dryad to confirm their suspicions. What they had was cursed water, which, although it wasn't enough to eliminate the dragon, would fulfill the objective of making it angry. The herd of dragons was already out of control, and at the inn where Yuji was staying, the owner told him that everyone had to go to the shelter. The gigantic dragon moved away from the volcano towards the city, furious at the rain that was beating down on him, cooling his body. Between the volcano and the city, there were 2 rivers, so Yuji wanted to know if the dragon dared to cross them to get to the city. His gigantic steps melted the ground where he stepped, and when he got close to the river, the water began to evaporate because of the heat. When he put a foot in the river, he suffered horrible pain and heated the water, causing all the fish to disappear. When he stopped feeling pain, the river was already dry and the dragon continued to advance without fear. Despite everything, Yuji ordered them to face him. With Wolf's incredible speed, they positioned themselves in front of the dragon, and with a freezing spell, they barely managed to stop a single foot. Yuji had no intention of giving up, attacking from above to freeze the upper body. That only provoked the fury of the dragon, who was about to throw fire from his mouth. Then, Yuji cast the spell multiplied 20 times to counter the flames. The people hid in the shelter, but that would be useless against the power of the dragon, who continued to advance even when the water of the second river wet both of his feet. However, everything they did gave Yuji time to prepare his next move. The slimes were holding back tons of water with a barrier that was suddenly released, releasing a gigantic wave to sink the dragon. The creature seemed to have been defeated, but it was not long before it got up again, spitting fire, angrier than ever. When he was about to throw his flames against the city, Yuji decided to use a spell that would leave him without magic power. It was the perpetual freezing magic with which he countered the fire breath that was increasing more and more until he could no longer contain the ice and covered the entire dragon, and the surrounding landscape was also frozen. The ice statue of the giant monster shattered, leaving the huge jewel in the middle. In addition to that, the slimes discovered a strange object. First of all, Yuji took the jewel to Geigel without directly revealing where he had gotten it from. Although for the master it was obvious where it came from, but he was willing to keep his secret. Then he found out about the city of Ordion, discovering that it was not popular because they were very closed with visitors. He also asked what the object he found on the mountain was, and it turned out to be an artificial rain-making machine that the guilds used in times of drought. But that one had the identification of the city where it was stolen erased. Later, Geigel finished the armor, proudly saying that it was a legendary level artifact, so powerful that he couldn't even test it in that place. As soon as Yuji arrived in Ordarion, he headed to the Adventurers Guild, feeling that he was not at all welcome for being a stranger. So he just checked the quest board and immediately left, leaving a slime to spy on a couple of men who began to follow him. They turned out to be members of the Blue Moon, who recognized him as one of the people who were marked as suspicious. Although the headquarters had already warned that they did not consider him dangerous, they did not trust the report of the mercenaries who were in charge of investigating him. They talked about eliminating Yuji, but it would be a risk if they made a mistake that would expose the organization after they worked so hard for their plans, that they even stole a rain-generating machine to awaken the dragon. Father Style found Yuji in the city and took him to the church to tell him that he was waiting for him there due to a divine revelation. He told him that long ago there was a church called Blue Moon. At that time, Style was a guy who lived his life in rebellion, and one day he and his group performed a ritual in honor of their fallen comrades. After that, they began to gain followers among the marginalized and the oppressed. One of them was Walter, an overly devout man who dedicated his soul to the worship of the gods. Before long, he became Style's right-hand man, but his ambition went much further. Then, the gods revealed to Steel that he must dismantle the Blue Moon Church. Not wanting to abandon his companions, he decided to ignore the order, and a few days later, they were attacked. He was the only one who managed to escape, feeling guilty because the gods tried to prevent his followers from being eliminated, and the church from being taken over by Walter's twisted plans, who taught the remaining followers that this world had to be destroyed. Now, the gods asked Style to warn Yuji about the plans of the Blue Moon. The divine message said that Walter would cause the disaster, and the divine emissary was the only one capable of stopping him. Style was sure that the emissary was Yuji. He could verify this because Yuji was able to use the Kethis dagger. When Yuji left, Johan asked Steel why he did not tell the full divine revelation. Style believed that Yuji would not want to carry out the god's order if he had known the whole truth. Walter was informed about Steel's meeting with Yuji, confirming that he might be the divine emissary. Walter himself was also able to hear the divine message, And the part that Steele didn't want to tell was where it said that the guide would lose his life so that the sage would rise. Yuji couldn't believe that he was really the emissary. When he returned to the church to ask more about it, Steele was already gone. The slimes had seen him leave the city heading deep into the forest. Steele had found the lair of the Blue Moon and managed to break through the barrier using a spell. He had gone to fight seriously, even knowing that his destiny was to lose his life so that Yuji would rise as the sage of the prophecy. When Yuji found the entrance to the lair, he purified the curse that blocked it so he could pass with his companions. Steele finished entering the hideout until he ran into Walter. Then, he had to defend himself from Walter's followers. But the one who caught him was Johann himself, who had accompanied him for a long time only to spy on him on Walter's orders. Steele didn't care about being eliminated because he knew that was his destiny. What he didn't know was that Walter's plans were much more evil than he imagined. He even placed a curse on his followers, turning them into monsters. At that moment, Yuji arrived, telling Steele that he had questions to ask him, but he understood that it might not be the most appropriate time for that. Johann's attacks were useless, and Yuji easily freed Steele. The monsters took care of distracting them, allowing Walter and Johann to escape. Johann learned how Walter obtained his powers through a fearsome machine. It didn't take long for Yuji to reach them, but Walter was already transforming into a ferocious creature due to the immense power he obtained from the evil gems. Yuji locked himself in a barrier with Steele while attacking Walter, but the monster could easily dodge individual attacks, so he sent several slimes to attack at the same time. He then increased his speed so that he couldn't avoid any fireballs. Still, he couldn't do any damage to him. Then, Yuji launched a slime, equipping him and the wolf with legendary level armors, taking the opportunity to test them. They were so fast that Walter didn't see them when they positioned themselves on his back, and it was impossible to dodge a powerful fireball that slammed him into the ground. The monster got up with a hole in its stomach and also missing an arm. However, it only had to absorb one of its cursed followers to regenerate as if nothing had happened. With each attack from Yuji, Walter absorbed the monsters to heal himself and become stronger. Although he used all the slimes around him to bombard him with a rain of fire, he healed too quickly because of the power of the curse. That gave Yuji an idea, so he got on Wolf and joined the fight himself to perform an extreme purification spell that severely damaged Walter's legs. That's why he attacked him furiously, slowly breaking the barrier that kept him protected. But Yuji wouldn't make it easy for him. He used a bunch of magic nets, and after trapping him, he launched a gigantic fireball, knocking him down again. As he melted in the fire, Walter mocked that it didn't matter who lost or won, his plans would still work. Then, he prayed a prayer asking his god to take his life and that of his followers to carry out the revelation. Steele thought there was something strange in his words, and at that moment, the machine activated, absorbing all the magical energy that was there, including Johann. Not even Steele understood what was happening, and then all the magic was concentrated, allowing the person of the prophecy to appear, the sage. In reality, it was Walter's death that would awaken the sage. In the legends, the sage saved them from a dragon, but he had so much power that it consumed his own life too soon. It seemed that Walter's plan was to resurrect him through a spirit summoning ceremony as if he were a god. Even so, Steele made it clear that he was not the god they worshipped. The sage did not hesitate to attack Yuji with magic identical to his own, only he did not hold back, destroying the entire area around him, and then rising to the sky as if he were a divine being. Yuji was not intimidated, and his companions were willing to support him. Wolf climbed through the air, jumping over barriers until he reached him so the slimes could attack. But the sage protected himself and launched the dangerous hellfire. Luckily, they dodged it in time. Then, hundreds of slimes went up to bombard him from all angles. That way, the hellfire couldn't attack them all at the same time. Yuji's strategy was effective, but he lost magic power very quickly, unlike the sage who seemed to have infinite energy. So, they changed plans, attacking from above to freeze him. The sage protected himself with a barrier and broke the ice in seconds. The slimes wasted no time launching a multiplied fireball, managing to knock him down for the first time, but without managing to hurt him. Then the two attacked each other, hitting the hellfire head-on until they couldn't take it anymore. Yuji's counter was already in the red, while the sage decided to stop to focus on fulfilling his mission in that place. casting a spell aimed at several cities where he activated the rain-generating machines. That caused the sky to be covered in clouds loaded with evil magic, and the rain fell on the ground, causing all the monsters it touched to go haywire. That was what the Blue Moon called the Salvation Plan. Everywhere adventurers had to defend themselves from the maddened monsters. The sage said that he gave his life to face the dragon. The problem was that no matter how much the sages sacrificed themselves, a more powerful dragon would always appear, causing disaster in the world. Their goal was to save the world by destroying it so as not to keep repeating the same cycle. Obviously, Yuji did not agree with that twisted idea. Still, all he could do was try to defend himself in a crossfire bombardment with skills of the same level until he ran out of energy. Apart from that, he was preoccupied with trying to eliminate the monsters that were approaching the cities. It was a really pointless strategy because it was impossible to maintain his magic power for long in that way. Then, Dryad told him that in Pashtan, they organized to defend themselves on their own. In the other cities, the same thing was happening. In all those places, they recognized that Yuji had already helped them enough. And now they themselves had to protect themselves. Yuji had never asked for help in his previous life. For that reason, he was filled with work until he was tired, and he did not know how good it was to receive support. Then, he cast a spell to enhance the powers of each of the warriors defending the cities, so Yuji could concentrate on his own fight. Father Style received a new revelation, where the gods said that there would be an eclipse at the moment that the divine judgment would be released. Yuji used the mana enhancer created by Dryad to recover his energy and went up himself facing the enemy. The sage asked him why he protected that world, and Yuji didn't know how to answer because he came to that place for no reason. However, all the creatures that accompanied him and the humans he met became important people to him. That's why he didn't hesitate to face them again in a crossfire. Then the system showed the option to use Divine Strike, and with that he managed to knock down the sage. The spell remained active, allowing him to use it again and again, weakening the enemy. But it wasn't enough to defeat him, so he took out the Kethis dagger to combine it with the Divine Strike, just at the moment when the solar eclipse appeared in the sky. When the sage was going to counterattack, Yuli enclosed him in a six-fold enhanced barrier, along with a total isolation matrix. In this way, he prevented him from causing a disaster before Yuji buried the dagger in his chest, causing it to be completely destroyed. The sky cleared, returning to normal, and Yuji fell exhausted. Luckily, he didn't receive any injuries. Style was able to return to the church and thank the gods for saving the world again. Meanwhile, Yuji left the city so as not to attract attention after what had happened. As always, in the cities they organized parties to celebrate that they had been victorious against the attacks. However, in the Ordarian Guild, there were still followers of the Blue Moon. There they had information about another plan to save the world with a purification machine that was almost ready, and their final goal was actually to destroy the Black Dragon of Ruin that would attack very soon. Yuji kept watching them, so he heard all their plans. At some point, he would have to take care of that problem. Meanwhile, I continued to defeat monsters by completing guild requests. It was so unbelievable that he said he worked alone, that the secretary thought he was so traumatized after losing his companions that he had gone crazy and no longer remembered them. Although Yuji made a great effort not to attract attention by trying to keep a low profile, there came a point where it was impossible for them not to recognize him as the tamer who was able to use magic. Now Yuji didn't know what to do after becoming famous as the adventurer who defeated a legendary dragon.